Kobe Bryant adjusted the strap on his carry-on bag, his sharp eyes scanning the bustling crowd at LAX. The airport was its usual chaos of crisscrossing travelers, muffled announcements over the intercom, and the rhythmic squeal of luggage wheels on tile. At his side, his daughters Natalia and Gianna stayed close, their youthful excitement tempered by the sheer size of the terminal. "Dad, are we going to have time to grab snacks before the flight?" Gianna asked, her voice light but full of curiosity. "Plenty of time," Kobe replied with a small smile, glancing at his watch. "We've got about an hour before boarding. Let's get through security first, then we'll see what we can find." Natalia, her headphones around her neck and phone in hand, looked up briefly. "Can we get smoothies? I saw a place near the entrance." Kobe chuckled. "Smoothies after security. Snacks, too. Let's just keep moving." As they approached the TSA checkpoint, Kobe couldn't help but notice the occasional lingering stares from other travelers. Some recognized him instantly. The whispered words, "That's Kobe Bryant," were hard to miss, while others cast furtive glances trying to confirm if the tall man in casual attire was indeed the basketball legend. Kobe was used to it. It came with the territory of being one of the most famous athletes in the world. Normally, he took it in stride, offering polite nods or a quick smile when people approached. Today, though, he was focused on his daughters. This trip was about spending time together, away from the relentless grind of his post-NBA schedule. As the family stepped into the security line, the familiar rituals began. Shoes off, electronics out, liquids in the bin. Ahead of them stood a middle-aged couple, a man and a woman in their late 50s. The woman, with a sharp haircut and a tightly pursed mouth, glanced back at Kobe and his daughters with a flicker of irritation. "Guess celebrities don't have their own line today," she muttered to her husband, her voice loud enough to carry. The man chuckled. "Yeah, slowing things down for the rest of us." Kobe caught the comment but didn't react. Gianna, however, frowned and looked up at him. "Did you hear that, Dad?" she whispered. He gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry about it, Gigi. Focus on the trip, not on people like that." But the woman wasn't done. As a fan approached Kobe with a pen and a piece of paper, nervously asking for an autograph, the woman sighed loudly. "Oh, great. Holding up the line now, of course." Kobe signed the autograph quickly, offering the fan a kind smile before returning to his daughters. Gianna's frown deepened, and even Natalia, who usually avoided confrontation, looked annoyed. "Dad, why do people act like that?" Gianna asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Dad?" "Because some people don't know how to keep their thoughts to themselves," Kobe replied, his tone calm. "It's not our job to fix that. Let's just get through this and keep moving." At the front of the line, the woman's irritation seemed to grow. She deliberately took her time unloading her belongings onto the conveyor belt, glancing back occasionally with a smug expression. When Kobe and his daughters reached the scanner, the woman turned to the TSA officer and said loudly, "I hope you're checking everyone's papers. You never know these days." The implication was unmistakable, and Kobe felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. He glanced at Natalia and Gianna, both of whom were now visibly uncomfortable. Natalia clutched her phone tightly, avoiding eye contact with anyone, while Gianna stared daggers at the woman. Kobe took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Keep moving," he said quietly to his daughters. The TSA officer, sensing the tension, quickly waved the family through after their items cleared the scanner. But the woman's muttering didn't stop. When Kobe and his daughters reached the other side of the security, they took a moment to regroup. Natalia slipped her headphones back on, retreating into her music, while Gianna crossed her arms and looked up at her father. "Why didn't you say something to her?" Gianna asked. "Because we've got more important things to focus on," Kobe said, crouching slightly so he was eye-level with her. "People like that want a reaction. If you give it to them, they win. You get me?" Gianna hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I guess, but it's not fair." No, it's not, Kobe agreed, but how we handle it, that's what matters. Natalia, still listening to music, glanced at her father. You're better than me. I would have told her off. Kobe chuckled, standing back up. That's why I'm the dad and you're the kids. Come on, smoothies, remember? The mood lightened as they found the smoothie stand near their gate. The girls picked out their favorite flavors, and Kobe paid for their drinks, making sure to keep the focus on enjoying the trip. For a brief moment, it felt like the tension from the security line had passed. But as they approached their gate, Kobe's stomach sank. The same couple from security, Linda and Roger, were seated near the boarding area, their expressions sour as ever. Linda spotted Kobe and his daughters immediately and nudged her husband, whispering something with a pointed glance in their direction. Seriously? Gianna muttered under her breath, her earlier frustration returning. Kobe guided them to seats on the opposite side of the gate, hoping to avoid further conflict. But it didn't take long for Linda's voice to carry across the room. Entitled athletes always think they're better than everyone else, she said loudly, not bothering to hide her disdain, and they teach their kids to act the same way. Roger chuckled, shaking his head. Overpaid for playing games. Must be nice. Gianna turned to her father, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. Are we really just going to sit here and let them talk about us like that? Kobe sighed, his calm exterior masking the frustration simmering beneath the surface. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about teaching his daughters the right way to handle moments like this. Let them talk, Kobe said quietly. They're only embarrassing themselves. Natalia put her headphones back on, clearly trying to block out the negativity, but Gianna remained tense, her fists clenched in her lap. Kobe watched his daughters, his mind racing. He had spent his entire career facing critics and overcoming obstacles, but moments like this, moments that involved his family, cut deeper than any on-court rivalry ever had. He knew it was only a matter of time before the situation reached a breaking point, and he was ready. Kobe leaned back in the airport seat, his eyes scanning the terminal gate. He wasn't one to avoid confrontation, but he had learned the power of patience and timing over the years. His daughters, however, were still learning those lessons. Gianna sat next to him, her fists still balled in her lap, as she glared across the room at the middle-aged couple. Natalia kept her headphones on, but her body language betrayed her discomfort. Kobe placed a calming hand on Gianna's shoulder. Gigi, relax, he said softly. We've got nothing to prove to them. That's easy for you to say, Gianna muttered, her voice tinged with frustration. They're being awful. You heard what they said about us. I did, Kobe said, his voice even, and they want us to react. You think their words hurt me? Gianna hesitated, then shook her head. Exactly, Kobe continued. So don't let it hurt you either. We've got somewhere to be, and they're not going to ruin that. Gianna nodded reluctantly, but her shoulders remained tense. Natalia peeked out from under her headphones, catching snippets of the conversation. She gave Kobe a small nod, understanding his point but still looking unsettled. Across the gate, Linda continued her passive-aggressive remarks, her voice carrying over the ambient noise of the terminal. People like that think the world owes them something, she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. If I had that kind of money, I wouldn't waste it flaunting myself in public. Roger chuckled, nodding along. Bet they didn't even pay for their tickets. Probably got bumped to first class just because of who he is. Several passengers glanced nervously between Linda and Kobe, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. A few exchanged whispered comments, but no one stepped in. Gianna's fists clenched tighter, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Kobe's hand gently squeezed her shoulder again. Not yet, he said quietly, shaking his head. But, Dad, not yet, he repeated, his tone firm but calm. Gianna let out a frustrated sigh, sinking back into her seat. Natalia pulled off her headphones, her expression a mix of anger and unease. This is ridiculous, Natalia said, her voice low. They're not going to stop, are they? Kobe leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Probably not. But remember, they're not in control of how we feel. We are. Linda wasn't finished. She stood up, walking toward the boarding counter under the pretense of checking her ticket, but her loud voice carried across the terminal. I just hope they don't delay the flight for any entitled passengers. Some of us actually planned ahead. Roger smirked, staying seated but glancing over at Kobe and his daughters. Can't blame her for speaking her mind, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Kobe finally stood, his towering frame drawing attention from everyone nearby. He wasn't angry, at least not visibly, but there was an unmistakable authority in the way he carried himself. Natalia and Gianna watched him closely, their expressions a mix of anticipation and pride. Kobe walked toward Linda and Roger, his steps deliberate. The murmurs in the terminal grew louder as passengers leaned in to see what would happen. Linda turned as he approached, her face tightening, with a mix of defiance and unease. "Excuse me," Kobe began, his voice calm but carrying an edge that commanded respect. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Linda crossed her arms, feigning nonchalance. "Oh, about what?" "About respect," Kobe said. "Not just for me, but for everyone around you who's had to listen to your comments." Roger stood, his smirk fading. "Hey, man, we're just having a conversation. Freedom of speech and all that." Kobe's eyes didn't leave Linda's. Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from accountability. You've been targeting me and my daughter's insecurity, and I've let it slide. But you've crossed a line. Linda scoffed, trying to mask her nervousness. "Oh, give me a break. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" Kobe asked, his tone steady, but cutting. "Or are you used to people letting you get away with it?" The terminal was silent now, all eyes on the confrontation. A flight attendant standing near the gate shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. Linda's face reddened. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're just sitting here minding our own business." "No," Kobe said firmly, "you're not. You've been loud and clear about how you feel, and everyone here has heard it. So, I'm giving you a choice. You can keep going and show everyone exactly who you are, or you can stop, sit down, and leave my family alone." Roger muttered something under his breath, but Linda didn't respond. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced around the terminal, realizing that no one was coming to her defense. Kobe waited, his presence unshakable. "Fine," Linda said finally, her voice tight with resentment. "But maybe next time don't act like you're above the rest of us." Kobe smiled faintly, tilting his head. "I'm not above anyone, but you don't get to decide where I belong." As Kobe turned and walked back to his daughters, the terminal seemed to exhale collectively. A few passengers murmured quietly, some nodding in approval. One man gave Kobe a small thumbs up, which Kobe acknowledged with a slight nod. Gianna and Natalia looked at him with a mixture of admiration and relief. "Now that," Gianna said, grinning, "was awesome." Natalia smirked. "Told you he was better than us at handling stuff like this." Kobe chuckled, sitting back down. "You don't always win by fighting back. Sometimes you just need to hold your ground." Gianna leaned forward, her expression serious. "But what if they don't stop?" Kobe glanced across the room at Linda and Roger, who were now sitting silently, their earlier confidence gone. "They already have," he said simply. Natalia slipped her headphones back on, finally relaxing. Gianna leaned back in her seat, a thoughtful look on her face. "Dad?" she asked after a moment. "Yeah? I want to be like that someday." Kobe smiled, pulling her into a side hug. "You already are." As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, Kobe felt a quiet satisfaction. The battle wasn't just about silencing ignorant voices. It was about showing his daughters that strength and dignity were always the right response to hate. And in that moment, he knew they'd learned something they'd carry with them forever. The boarding announcement rang out across the terminal, a final call for passengers to line up and prepare to board. Kobe stood, gathering his bag, while Natalia and Gianna slung their carry-ons over their shoulders. The tension that had hung in the air earlier had dissipated somewhat, but the memory of the confrontation lingered. Linda and Roger remained seated near the gate, their earlier bravado now replaced with awkward silence. Linda avoided eye contact with everyone around her, her arms crossed tightly, as though physically shielding herself from the weight of the stairs. Roger muttered something to her, but she didn't respond. As Kobe and his daughters approached the boarding line, a woman in her 30s stepped out from the crowd and caught his attention. "Excuse me, Mr. Bryant," she said, her voice soft but steady. Kobe turned, his face calm but guarded. "Yes?" The woman hesitated, glancing back at the couple before meeting Kobe's gaze. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to them. I should have said something earlier, but I didn't. I'm sorry about that." Kobe studied her for a moment, then gave her a reassuring smile. "It's okay. I understand." She nodded, her relief evident. "You handled that with so much grace. Your daughters are lucky to have you as a role model." "Thank you," Kobe said, glancing at Natalia and Gianna. "I'm just trying to show them the right way to handle things." The woman stepped back into the crowd as the line began to move. Gianna looked up at her father, her expression pensive. "Do you think other people wanted to say something too?" she asked. "Maybe," Kobe said as they handed their boarding passes to the attendant. "But not everyone knows how. It's not easy to stand up in moments like that." Natalia chimed in, her voice quiet but firm. "It's easier when you see someone else do it first." Kobe smiled. "Exactly." The plane was a typical mix of cramped seats and buzzing conversations as passengers settled in. Kobe and his daughters found their first-class seats, placing their bags in the overhead bins. Natalia took the window seat, Gianna the aisle, and Kobe in the middle. As they fastened their seat belts, Gianna noticed Linda and Roger entering the plane. The couple shuffled past the first-class cabin toward coach, their expressions sour. "Look who's back," Gianna muttered. Kobe glanced at her, his voice calm but firm. "Let it go, Gigi. They're not worth our energy anymore." Gianna sighed but nodded, leaning back in her seat. The plane taxied onto the runway, and as it took off, the hum of the engines filled the cabin. Natalia was glued to her phone, her headphones back on, while Gianna rested her head against the seat. Kobe took a moment to reflect, his mind replaying the events of the day. The confrontation with Linda and Roger had left a mark, but it wasn't just about them. It was about what his daughters had seen, what they had learned, and how they would carry those lessons into the world. "Dad?" Gianna's voice broke through his thoughts. "Yeah, Gigi. Do you think they'll stop acting like that after today?" Kobe turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Some people don't change, no matter what you say." "Then why bother?" Gianna asked, frowning. "Because it's not just about them," Kobe said, his voice steady. "It's about us. About showing you and Natalia that there's a way to stand up for yourself without stooping to their level. If we don't say anything, we're letting them think it's okay. And if we let them think it's okay, nothing ever changes." Gianna nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I get it. It's about not letting them win." "Exactly," Kobe said, smiling. "And sometimes winning means just keeping your dignity." As the plane leveled out, the flight attendants began moving through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks. A few passengers in first class leaned over to speak quietly with Kobe, offering words of support and admiration. "You handled that situation at the gate so well," one man said, shaking Kobe's hand. "I was rooting for you the whole time." Another woman nodded. "It's people like you who remind the rest of us to do better. Thank you for what you said." Kobe accepted their comments graciously, exchanging polite words before turning back to his daughters. "You see that?" he said, gesturing subtly toward the other passengers. "Even when it feels like no one's on your side, there's always someone paying attention. Sometimes they just need a little push to find their voice." Natalia smiled faintly. "Guess you're right." Gianna grinned. "You usually are." Colby laughed softly, ruffling her hair. "Don't forget that." As the flight neared its destination, Colby looked out the window, his thoughts settling into clarity. He thought about the lessons he had tried to instill in his daughters over the years, the importance of resilience, dignity, and standing up for what's right. Today had been another test, not just for him, but for Natalia and Gianna. And as he glanced at them, he knew they had passed. The plane began its descent, and Colby leaned back, a sense of quiet pride washing over him. Linda and Roger's ignorance hadn't won today. What had won was something stronger, the grace and resolve of a family determined to rise above, and in the end, that was what mattered most.